Without a fundamental change in our way of thinking, it is impossible to consciously choose the path of unconditional one-way love. Yet making that exact choice is what triggers the change. Transformed individuals do not harbor unrealistic expectations of others or of life. Instead, they consciously choose to love broken, miserable people who falsely believe their selfish intentions are completely unnoticed. Welcome back to my channel. We're going through the Sermon on the Mount, verse by verse, and the next verse says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you." This is the sixth and the final legal topic that Jesus addresses with his commentary, serving as the absolute climax of everything said so far in the Sermon on the Mount. Here Jesus connects multiple themes from earlier sections. First, a righteousness that exceeds the righteousness of the religious system. Second, seeking reconciliation with those who hold something against us. Third, the meekness, the mercy and peacemaking established in the Beatitudes. The statement Jesus is commenting on is complex. First, love your neighbor clearly originates from the Mosaic law. Moses said, "You shall not take vengeance nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord." However, the rest of the statement that Jesus is quoting, on which he comments, which says, "And hate your enemy," cannot be found anywhere in the Old Testament. Theologians have long debated where Jesus encountered this phrase, and the best conclusion is that it resulted from a corrupted human mindset. This phenomenon is commonly known as looking for a loophole in the law. When a person's inner values do not align with the higher law, they unconsciously interpret that law through their old values. So when people who do not understand what love is, and who are then told to love their neighbor, that is like trying to explain the color purple to someone who is born blind. If fear, revenge, and hostility and trauma are the only things they know, they will interpret the commandment to love through that exact lens. This is likely how the command "love your neighbor" received a human clarification that effectually meant "and hate your enemy." An untransformed mind is basically a disease of consciousness, completely trapped in the scarcity of matrix of survival consciousness. Loving humanity in general is easy for untransformed people because that kind of love exists purely in the imagination. Loving concrete, specific individuals with the first and the last name is incredibly difficult for them. Listen to how perfectly Dostoevsky exposes our secret ego traps and our resistance to actual human proximity in his novel The Brothers Karamazov. He says, "The more I love humanity in general, the less I love man in particular. That is, separate individuals. In my dreams, I often arrived at strange thoughts of serving humanity, and I would perhaps have gone to the cross for mankind if it were suddenly demanded. And yet, I am incapable of spending even a single day in the same room with anyone. I know this from experience. As soon as someone is close to me, his personality oppresses my self-love and restricts my freedom. In one day, I am capable of hating even the best of men. One because he takes too long to eat his dinner, another because he has a cold and keeps blowing his nose. I become an enemy of men the moment they touch me in the slightest. That is why it always happened that the more I hated individual people, the more passionate my love became for humanity in general. Here we have exposed the sheer petty malice of a frightened mind, showing how easily it fabricates enemies even out of the best people. At the root of all hostility is fear. Even if no one has done us any wrong, a frightened mind will always find an enemy. Hostility eventually begins to shape a person's very identity, which carries far-reaching consequences. For instance, the Jews were the first persecutors of Christians. The first generation of Christians did not fear them. They forgave them for the persecutions, arrests, and murders. The first Christian martyr, Stephen, prayed for them much like Jesus prayed for them from the cross. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. However, the second generation did not pray for their persecutors in this way. Instead, they feared them back and forgave them nothing. The church fathers read the history of the Jewish people in the Old Testament and interpreted prophetic critiques of Israel as proof that the Jews were a criminal nation whose sins culminated in the execution of Jesus. They viewed themselves as pure and beyond critique, while using the existence of the Christian church as the proof that God has rejected the Jews. The result was that on a theological level, they sowed seeds that would bear fruit in the deep fears of the Jews, numerous pogroms, and the Holocaust. Notice how quickly a personal victim mentality curdles into institutionalized hatred and projection. If you do not consciously choose step one, which is radical forgiveness, your consciousness will inevitably default to step two, and that is fear, control, systemic shadow casting. These are the catastrophic consequences of a theology written by a frightened mind that perceives itself strictly as a victim. This is how the religious systems of control are born. They consistently require an enemy to keep their followers united and to define who they are. How many religions can honestly claim they never had an enemy, never condemned a heretic, or never persecuted dissenters? A frightened mind is a factory for the most dangerous ultimate solutions. The commentary of Jesus, "Love your enemies," strikes directly at the heart of this disease. John stated, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear." Fear and love cannot occupy the same mind simultaneously. Therefore, love your enemies is actually an affirmative way of saying, do not be afraid of them. When we are liberated from the fear of an enemy, hostility becomes entirely one-sided. We are truly set free to live the love ethics of Jesus, which is vastly superior to the ethics of any system that requires an enemy to maintain its unity and survival. Peacemakers do not need an enemy to know who they are. Christian was originally a nickname given to them by outsiders in Antioch. Although they experienced intense persecution and had every reason to allow the bitterness of exploitation to shape their mindset, their true identity came from Jesus and the way of thinking he taught them. When you arrive at love your enemies commandment, pretense or acting no longer works. Loving your enemy is not just another minor detail in the Sermon on the Mount. It is an entirely different state of being that a person must consciously choose for themselves, knowing they are choosing to love and build peace in a world ruled by fear where the majority is ready for war. Only a person who chooses to love even their enemy is capable of loving real human beings. Those who are fractured, boring, and sad beneath their superficial facades, rather than loving an imaginary humanity that is perfectly interesting, whole, and cheerful. To his command of loving our enemies, Jesus adds 3 illustrations that display how a person who does not fear their enemy actually thinks. The first illustration is, bless those who curse you. To bless someone means liberating them by highlighting the nobility and value within them and invoking divine favor and protection in order that the person can hope for the future prosperity. We are all somewhat fractured within ourselves. The worst individuals have something good and positive inside them, and even the best individuals possess something dark and dangerous inside them. Spiritually transformed people are capable of seeing the good and valuable elements even in the worst among us, and blessing it. Cursing does the exact opposite. It chains people down by highlighting their flaws and worthlessness and invoking judgment and misfortune so that the person ends their life in total despair. Peacemakers are capable of blessing those who curse them. To see the tiny fragments of nobility and goodness in those who invoke evil upon them, those who see no good in them and wish they would vanish from the face of the earth. They can do this because they are blessed at every single stage of their mind shift journey, and they recognize that curses are merely the empty words of frightened, of immature people who believe in superstition. The king of Moab hired the false prophet Balaam to curse Israel, yet Balaam could not utter a curse, only a blessing. In the end, he had to admit, for there is no sorcery against Jacob, nor any divination against Israel. How do we reach a state of consciousness where this becomes natural and effortless? Once again, the key lies in the integration of mercy and justice. Because of justice, peacemakers have looked inward and seen everything they carry inside of them, recognizing that there are unresolved patterns God left behind to trip them up, allowing them to learn from those exact stumbles. Because of the mercy, they have become gentle with themselves, allowing space for learning from mistakes and gradual growth. Because they are intimately familiar with the painful process of integrating internal opposites, they can easily ignore the noise of external curses and patiently listen for the silent goodness hidden beneath all the surrounding fear. Locating and blessing the hidden goodness in terrifying people and fanning the spark of hope in even the most dangerous individuals, this is the superpower peacemakers use to build peace. The second illustration is do good to those who hate you. It is quite impossible to do good to people who intentionally harm us if we view ourselves as victims. Those who have undergone a mind shift do not perceive themselves as victims. Instead, they see their haters as the true victims of their own self-generated malice. Hatred eats a person from the inside out. It fractures their personality, births intense envy, strips them in their capacity for justice and objectivity, and disables them from recognizing beauty until they begin to admire ugliness. It completely distorts their perception of good and evil, blinding them to the truth until they become enthusiastic about lies. These are severe disorders of the mind and reality perception. Peacemakers do good to those who hate them, specifically to preserve their own sanity, their wholeness, their sense of justice, their perception of beauty, and their alignment with truth. By doing so, they keep their own hearts pure. Bernard Shaw famously said, I learned long ago never to wrestle with a pig. You get dirty and besides, the pig likes it. Hatred is entanglement. The hater wants nothing more than to drag you down into their mud because they lack the capacity to meet you where you are. Entering into a conflict means you have taken the bait and let yourself get stained in the process. The entire power of hatred depends directly on the degree to which we bite this bait and allow ourselves to be provoked. When we actively do good, hatred completely loses its power. Furthermore, only goodness has the structural power to transform an enemy into a friend. This is what the absolute destruction of the enemy looks like in the cosmic battle between good and evil. Goodness initiates a brand new mind shift, and the leaven of the kingdom spreads. Paul said, "Therefore, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him a drink. For in so doing, you will heap coals of fire on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." This is not easy. It requires immense strength to wage this specific kind of warfare. Yet this is the very nature of love in this physical reality. To quote Dostoevsky once more, active love is a harsh and fearful thing compared with love in dreams. The final illustration is pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. There are no frightened victims hiding away here. Peacemakers are fearless intercessors who mediate before God on behalf of their persecutors. They remember that they too were once trapped in this exact same frequency of fear. The things that irritate us in others bother us precisely because we have not entirely cleared those same patterns out of ourselves. By condemning them, we would only be condemning ourselves. Therefore, the absolute best path is to pray for them. Peacemakers cannot sincerely pray for someone's mind shift and blessing without beginning to see them exactly as they are. As human beings who have been severely wounded by life, individuals so thoroughly consumed by hatred that they are completely incapable of functioning in any other way. Because peacemakers are deeply familiar with the architecture of a transformation. They know exactly how many divine miracles are required to even begin and sustain that path. Prayer for a persecutor naturally comes out of compassion. Through prayer, peacemakers call upon God to accomplish through His Spirit what they could not achieve with their own human goodness. Finally, by praying for their persecutors, a peacemaker learns to draw closer to God during times of trial. If they focus entirely on their hardships, they will pollute their mind and heart with fear, slipping right back into a victim mentality, which places them only a single step away from revenge. When Jesus says, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you." When he says that, he is instructing us to always choose love and goodwill, even when we are fully aware of the dangerous intentions and the true nature of the people we are loving. Without a fundamental change in our way of thinking, it is impossible to consciously choose the path of unconditional one-way love. Yet making that exact choice is what triggers the change. Transformed individuals do not harbor unrealistic expectations of others or of life. Instead, they consciously choose to love broken, miserable people who falsely believe their selfish intentions are completely unnoticed. The love of those who have undergone a mind shift is a love that is entirely liberated. It possesses every legitimate reason to turn around and walk away, yet it chooses to stay and love simply because it has selected that specific mode of existence in the world. It is not naive, it is not uninformed or coerced. It is sober, conscious, and deliberately chosen. It will continue to love even when it receives hostility, curses, and persecution in return. This is the love of the cross of Jesus, and it is the exact cross that transforms people who carry it. To the untransformed mind, this love is completely impossible and insane. But to those who have undergone a mind shift, it is the ultimate wellspring of spiritual health and purity of the heart, a superpower in the fight against the evil, acting as a leaven of the kingdom that destroys enemies by transforming them into friends.